is pretty well over even before it really gets started, because the minute the Israelites show their commitment to fight, their enemies run away. Their enemies run away from them. When the Arameans, verse 15, when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. And Hadadezer sent out the Arameans who were beyond the river, and they came to Helam, and Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadadezer, led them. Now, when it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Helam. And the Arameans arrayed themselves to meet David and fought against him. But the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed 700 charioteers of the Arameans and 40,000 horsemen, and struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the king's servants of Hadadezer saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Arameans feared to help the sons of Ammon anymore. King Hadadezer, he's seen his army get scattered. They've run away, and undoubtedly this is something of a sting, something of a uncomfortable situation, because a lot of these guys would make a fair amount of money by hiring out their armies as mercenaries. Well, if your mercenaries get a reputation of running away from battle, you're going to have a hard time hiring them out. Nobody wants to hire an army that's going to run at the first sign of a battle. And so he's decided, no, we're going to have to go into a fight here, and we're going to have to go into a fight against the Israelites, and we're going to have to whoop them. So, because I got to restore my reputation and the reputation of my army, or I'll never see another mercenary commission again. And so we see here that it is David himself who is leading the battle against the Arameans. And the result, as we see here, is the utter defeat. It says the Arameans fled before Israel. David killed 700 charioteers. Now, if we look over in 1 Chronicles 19, see a little bit of a discrepancy here. In 1 Chronicles 19, we see the parallel of this record in this book. Starting in verse 16 of chapter 19, then when the Arameans saw they had been defeated by Israel, they sent messengers and brought out the Arameans who were beyond the river, with Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadadezer, leading them. When it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came upon them and drew up in formation against them. And when David drew up in battle array against the Arameans, they fought against him. And the Arameans fled before Israel, and David killed of the Arameans 7,000 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers, and put to death Shobach, the commander of the army. So you see a little bit of a discrepancy between the account here at chapter 18, or verse 18 of chapter 10. In 1 Samuel says 700 charioteers, and verse 18 says 7,000 charioteers. And which one's right? Well, it depends on which scholar you want to read. Most scholars want to tend to go with First Chronicles as being more accurate, but other scholars will point out that will argue no, they think that these chariots being fairly for their time fairly complicated pieces of equipment and requiring a fair amount of skill and so forth, that the 700 number may be right, more accurate in the account in 2 Samuel. The bottom line is that probably at some point some scribe has inserted an extra zero or taken one away in one of these accounts. We're not sure which. Doesn't really matter, but folks are going to try and point that out as a flaw in the Bible and try and make some hay out of it. It's the point is that David was victorious in this battle, and as a result, he establishes now the kingdom of Israel now extends all the way from essentially southern Palestine all the way to the Euphrates River, because all of these kingdoms then of the Arameans as it says here in verse 19, they made peace with Israel and served them. They became vassal states to Israel, and the Arameans feared to help the sons of Ammon anymore. So, yeah, your supply, Ammon, your supply of mercenaries has been cut off. And so you're against David now all by yourself, all by your lonesome Ammonites. And so again, David now is extended now all the way to the Euphrates River. That is the extent, the northernmost extent of the northwestern extent of the kingdom of Israel. All right, so from there, yeah, Gary. Yeah. Well, we have not changed the overall storyline. We have not changed the overall content or message of the of the event. Uh, uh, we are certainly aware of this kind of side notations that sometimes got into the text. The textual critics are able to look at them, able to find them, but we have not at all affected the overall line of the story of the events that have been described. So, in to my mind, a trivial thing like this is not, not of a par to be compared to some kind of massive failure of the Bible. All right. So let's continue on. We go into chapter 11. Now, this represents a big change in the tone of the text, because now we find essentially probably David's greatest blunder, his greatest failure as a man of God, described here in this book. And it begins with his affair with Bathsheba. This is in chapter 11. It says, "Then it happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David would send Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed in Jerusalem." Well, David has had or does have several close calls in battle. Some of these are recorded. If we flip ahead, for example, to say, look at 2 Samuel 21 and verse 17. Starting at verse 15, he says, "Then when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David went down with his servants with him, and they fought against the Philistines. David became weary. When Ishbi-Benob, who was of the descendants of the giant, the weight of whose spear was 300 shekels of bronze in weight, was girded with a new sword, and he intended to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, helped him and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, 'You shall not go out again with us to battle, that you may not extinguish the lamp of Israel.'" So David had some close calls. This may not have been his first one that we read about here in 1 Samuel. It probably was not his first one. And his military commanders don't want him there. They don't want him at the battle scene. He is, frankly, too big a target. He is too important a target for him to be. It'd be like having, again, the president of the United States, leading the battle on the front lines. You don't do that. You don't put your commanders, you don't put your supreme commander on the front line of the battle. There's just too much at risk. And so David has been apparently urged to stay behind, and he does stay behind in Jerusalem, sending out Joab, the commander of his army. But they don't want to put the whole nation at risk, because if David goes down, who's going to take his place? Becomes the question. Well, David still, of course, has this unfinished business with the Ammonites. And so all right, we're going to take care of the Ammonites. We send them back over to that city of Rabbah, and we see David basically just waiting in Jerusalem waiting to find out what's going on. And some of the Bible scholars, Bible commentators will make note of the fact that sometimes our greatest battles with sin come not when we're busy with other things, busy working, busy with things that have to get taken care of. No, our greatest temptations come when we're taking it easy, when we're waiting, when we're bored, when we've got time on our hands. That's when the greatest opportunity, it seems that's the greatest opportunity for sin to come into our lives, is when we're kind of taking it easy. Well, David was no exception here. David sitting around Jerusalem, waiting for news from Joab, probably tending to the affairs of state, but basically it sounds like he was bored. And verse 2, and when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her, and when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. Number of things to point out here. First of all, here's Uriah. Uriah is identified as a Hittite. He is identified as a Hittite no fewer than 4 times in this chapter. So we are very clear that yes, Uriah is not a Jew. He is a member of the Hittite nation, but he is apparently a worshiper of Jehovah. Indeed, his name means Jehovah is my light. As a descendant, he's a descendant of Canaan, but he is apparently a godly man. He is a worshiper of Jehovah. And so we see that fact about him, and we understand that the Bible, the Old Testament law, condemned the mistreatment of the foreigner, even though he is a foreigner, and here's a man who is described by all accounts as a godly man. The scholars that as we read through this account, here's this woman bathing on a rooftop. Was she being immodest? Was she exposing herself unnecessarily? Scholars disagree with that. They argue that in this time and in this culture, that rooftop bathing was quite common because normally you would have been hidden from view. Normally, no one would have been able to see you if you were taking a bath on the roof of your house. But as it turns out, the king's palace being elevated and he can see over, is David a peeping Tom? The answer is likely yes. He was, he was discovering a view and he was enjoying it. And of course, that result of that behavior leads to this lust that he has for Bathsheba, and that lust that he has for Bathsheba ends up being tragic for him and for his family and for the entire nation of Israel. We realize, of course, Jesus condemns this behavior in the New Testament. We're familiar, I suspect, with this passage in Matthew, the 5th chapter. Jesus, verse 27, he said, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And of course, this is what's happened to David. David has seen this woman, and in this moment of passion, of desire, he launches himself on a path that, like I said, will ultimately destroy his family and will severely damage the nation of Israel. Some other things to know. Bathsheba is described Yes. Yeah, $1,000 of silver. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. They come back, well, in the springtime, so it may have been a year and a half later or something like that. Yeah. It was a more routine thing. Yes. And easily handled by Joab. Yeah. Yeah. Slow process. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't think his staying behind was sinful. I agree with that fully. I don't think his staying behind was sinful. Might have been unwise, but it wasn't sinful. And uh, and allowing himself to get bored, I suppose, might have been his doubt. Really? Yes. Yeah, verse 2. And when evening came, David rose from his bed and walked around on the roof of his house. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Well, he saw a woman bathing from his roof. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he was getting an eyeful. Um, Another factor we have is the fact that here's Bathsheba, as it says here, Bathsheba is the daughter of Eliam. Well, who's Eliam? Well, Eliam is the son of Ahithophel. Ahithophel is one of David's trusted counselors. And as we'll see the story unfold eventually, when David's son Absalom comes in to the scene, we find that Ahithophel, David's counselor, will throw in with Absalom. And this may explain why that took place. That here is David, who is, well, he's kind of shaming the family. He's bringing this woman over to commit adultery with her. Um, there is absolutely no indication that he has any thought of marrying her uh, uh, prior to killing her husband. Um, he just wants to take her. He just wants to have her for a night, kind of a one night stand, which would, it's a shameful thing. And this may again explain why Ahithophel, upon seeing his granddaughter be treated in such a fashion, why he would have been angry and may have thrown in with David's son then when David's son comes into the scene. Um, Here is David. David and Bathsheba, as it says here, he lay with her and he had purified herself. They are committing a capital offense, okay? They both know they are committing a capital offense. We look over in Leviticus, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 20. Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 10. If there's a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, the one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. They both knew this law. They both knew it. And so it's a capital offense. David knows what he's doing is a capital offense. But he has become so enamored with power. You know, maybe what John said earlier. He's gathered up all these riches out of defeating the Arameans. He's king now, and suddenly he's feeling that pull of the power that he's got, and decides he can get away with anything. And this may explain why Bathsheba then informs him after the fact, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant, because she knows she's at risk too, and she's expecting David to use his position to protect her. And so that would make sense, that he would use that position to protect her. You know, we asked the question, why would David do this? He already has multiple wives. We know at this point he has at least, I think, 5 wives that are mentioned, maybe more if I may have lost count, but he's got a multitude of wives, all of them, you know, taken legally as legal wives, and yet he's motivated to take yet another man's wife. And we ask, why is that? Here's a man that has waited patiently for God to give him the kingdom as it was promised to him. And even though he was promised the kingdom, he would not take it directly from Saul. Basically, he said, if God wants to give thee the kingdom, he'll arrange for it. And God did, of course. Well, why doesn't he have that same kind of patience about any of the other things in his life? Why does he allow this one episode to ruin him? We don't know. We don't know what it is that moves him so, other than he takes upon this idea that he's got to have this woman. It's almost like an obsession with him in some way. He's got to have this woman, and he won't be satisfied unless he takes her. Well, David, rather than try to confess his sin and come clean, he decides to try to cover it up. He compounds his sin. Verse 6, then David sent to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and of the people and of the state of the war. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and a present from the king was sent out after him. But Uriah slept by the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. Now when they told David, saying, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, have you not come up from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I go down to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, stay here today also, and on tomorrow I will let you go. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now David called him, and he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And in the evenings he went out to lie on his bed with his Lord's servants, but did not go down to his house. And so here's David. David's going to try and cover this up. He tries 3 different ways to try and cover this up. First, the clean way. I'll call Uriah back. Uriah will go home. He'll be with his wife, and we'll pretend that everything is as it should be. Then, when Uriah won't go down to his house, he tries a dirty trick. All right, well, I'll make him drunk and send him home. And finally, he'll come up with a criminal plan. The text here in all this passage here refers to Uriah as the Hittite 4 times as an emphasis to his nationality, that he's not a Jew, and yet we find this man. It's an interesting thing that we find this man. Notice his reaction to in verse 11. He says, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters. Notice his first concern. His first concern is the ark. The symbol of God, if you will, is living in a tent, and Israel is living in a tent, and Joab is living out in the open field over there. And am I supposed to go to my house and enjoy the comforts of home? No, he won't. He says, I won't do that. I'm not going to do that. That would be dishonorable. We find here in Uriah, we find a man who's concerned about the things of God. We find a man who's an honorable man, a very honorable man. David's actions, on the other hand, reek of hypocrisy. David is determined to get this guy, get him to go home. And his offer is for, again, Uriah to go wash his feet, go home and enjoy the comforts of home, of course, including, a conjugal visit with your wife. And Uriah's turning him down. No, I'm not going to do that. So then David, of course, tries to get Uriah drunk. If we see over in Habakkuk, we find out that this kind of action is condemned there in that passage. Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, and verse 15. Woe to you who makes your neighbors drink, who mix in your venom even to make them drunk so as to look at their nakedness. You will be filled with disgrace rather than honor. Now you yourself drink and expose your own nakedness. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will come upon your glory. So this idea of trying to make the guy drunk is a disgrace. It is a disgrace. It is a dishonor. And this whole episode reeks of David's hypocrisy. One commentator on this observed, says Uriah drunk proved to be a better man than David was sober. And we see that there is quite a bit of honor here to Uriah and to his behavior. All right, I think I'm going to stop there. I'll stop there and we'll continue on this next section about Uriah next week. I appreciate your attention and your comments this morning. Thank you.